We are, you can go.
Hey.
Hooray.
Good morning, everybody. I'm going to be too bright and cheery for this time on a Sunday morning. My name is Donna Scott, and we are here to talk about surprise smash. That's in capital letters for some reason. And this is the summary of the panel. We are heading into the future. What will be the great sellers, the next runaway hits that sweep into the publishing industry and run away with the plaudits and prizes? So there's two running aways there. The editor in me is going, no, dude, it's just running ones. From the outlandish to the strange to the improbable and impossible. Our panel, with help from the audience, oh my God, you've got stuff to do.
Yes.
Consider what might be the next big thing. Okay.
Which is good because we've done loads of planning for this.
so many, these copious notes. I have to put my glasses on to read them. So I'm Donna Scott, former chair of the British Science Fiction Association, editor of the Newcom Press Smash series, Best of British Science Fiction, general editor, writer, podcaster, comedian, and I am joined by.
Hi.
I'm
Duncan, and I like awkward pauses. Duncan Bradshaw. I have a middle name which is I'd like to abbreviate to P to make me sound seem more enigmatic than I really am. I write a weird mix of horror, comedy, and bizarro. Basically, something my personality out. I've just released a new book, which I don't have copies of, so I'm not going to go and pimp them out and leave it at the front, but they are available in dealing. Me and Don have been on the panel before, but 5 years are up now, so we can actually be on the panel again. So we'll have no more of the flamethrower incident.
Okay.
Follow that, yeah. Hi, I'm Dave Watkins. David is my writing name.
Ooh, posh.
To sound posher, that's right, because you can't be posh with a Welsh accent. I write horror also. I tend towards the thriller end of horror. I've written a couple of werewolf books and a book about the devil. I've got a book coming out next year where basically it doesn't end well for the entire city of Exeter, which was a lot of fun.
It's very based on reality then.
Have you got a thing against Exeter?
No, I love Exeter.
So to talk this panel, so like, are your own books going to be the next big thing, you think?
Those?
Yeah.
Well, not for people of Exeter. I think I can already hear the pitchforks being unrusted, which is totally a word.
They're being sharpened.
At least WD-40, isn't it? Yeah. That's a good way of getting rust up. I've just done.
I'm more of a blunt implement kind of guy when it comes to outraging mobs, really. So I'm not trusted with pitchforks.
Yeah. So I think we're already predicting that the next big thing is actually going to be an outrage hit.
I'm okay with that.
I'm not sure she bloody gets sales out of it, apart from Exeter.
We like that thing where people boil the books just so they can burn them.
Mind you, we are making assumptions people next to can read. I mean, I'm sorry if you are from Exeter.
Ooh!
Anti-Exeter for me.
So, a serious question. So then, we're living in interesting times, aren't we? So interesting, we're worried about how we're going to get home. So how do you think current affairs shape the literature we buy right now? Do you think it's going to have has an effect on what people buy?
Yeah, I think it does. I think it influences everything that you read. It can't not. Personally, I'm really looking forward to the end of the pandemic bookshelf, where everybody's written about a horror story in the middle of the pandemic, because, you know, the pandemic was horrific enough for enough people. We don't need to write a horror story about it as well. I think actually what people need is a bit of escapism and probably a bit of frivolity. Say, you know, Duncan's, I accidentally summoned a world-ending monster. I bought it yesterday. You know, things like that, I think, will probably be more of a release for people than your super serious, you know what, maybe we should have dropped a nuke on Wuhan 2 years ago and then we wouldn't be in this situation, hooray. Maybe if Trump hadn't been president of the United States, lots of things wouldn't have happened. And for me, I think escapism is the way forward.
I think as well, I mean, I think one thing this pandemic's proved is that a lot of books and a lot of media where there's a pandemic or there's a apocalyptic, approaching a post-apocalyptic situation, a lot of the things that they say people do in books don't fucking happen. You know what I mean? I think it has kind of broken out into two kind of camps, really. You kind of, you know, even things down to like the vaccine, that people believe that it's a good thing and that perhaps they don't just do it for themselves, but they do it altruistically. You've also got other people that, you know, again, it's against my freedom or, again, free will and human rights. I mean, that's ultimately, everyone's got to make their own decision. It's also come down to, you know, a lot of sort of apocalyptic outbreaks when they happen. You've got very things. And again, you kind of look at what's happened, and again, I'm not going to generalise, but there's still people that quite saying this is their bollocks, it's not actually happening. It's like, I know you obviously can't transpose it to say the flesh-eating dead or something like that, because you would like to think that even if people would think, hang on, this guy down the road, he's got half a face missing, he wants to fucking eat my brains. Perhaps he is real, or he could just be a cosplayer, I suppose. But it's just, I think people who do write apocalyptic fiction, because that's always popular, I think they just will need to almost kind of counterbalance it with the experiences of this. I mean, personally for me, I'm not. If someone sort of wrote, I wrote a book and it's about, you know, set in coronavirus, it's like, I couldn't be bothered to read it because it's been a dull fucking 18 months. I'm not going to lie to you. I mean, I spend more time in my house looking at the same four walls, speaking to my wife, and she's a lovely person. And if she's watching this, I hope God she's not. But it's just, I like to see other people now. It's why it's nice to go down here and see different people and communicate with them. And it's just, I think people need a break. And I think, as Dave said, it is that escapism. So.
How do you write a thriller set in the pandemic? You know, is it just going to be Rear Window? The pandemic, you know, it's shit, isn't it?
I noticed a trend as well, sorry, just on Amazon ratings. I've actually noticed some people reviewing Amazon books that's written, say, about 10 years ago, set in, you know, 2021 or whatever, and they said, this book's completely inaccurate, it's not mentioning coronavirus once. It's like, of course it fucking has. I mean, they're good at writing fiction, but they're not soothsayers, you know what I mean? It's just...
Did Doris Stokes do a lot of science fiction?
Dora the Explorer gets coronavirus.
I mean, the other thing about the pandemic as well is, like, if you go back to things like The Stand, you know, if you read The Stand, nobody said, I'm not having a fucking vaccine, you can piss right off.
Yeah.
You know, nobody said, I'm not wearing a mask.
Yeah.
You know, people wouldn't actually have believed the way the pandemic panned out.
Panned out, Emmy.
Sorry,
I'm licking that.
you know, you just couldn't have predicted that. So, and I'm not saying one way or the other about anti-vaxxers, they're fucking morons. You know, you just you couldn't have predicted that.
No, I was those that. Hello.
I was just going to say, it feels like if you were to try and write a zombie apocalypse and set it presently, you'd have to write it. People go, I'm going to go lick that zombie. I don't care. My right to go lick that zombie, and that's just what we're going to
I'm
end
going
up
to
with.
inject some bleach into my zombie.
Do you guys think that maybe there's going to be a grace period, like in the way that you kind of had like First World War, Second World War, and then people kind of are going to look back on this and write it as just the history, you know, the kind of near past history. Like, because I'm in the same camp with Duncan and Dave. Like, fuck this. We need something funny. We need something that's gonna kind of get us away from this stuff and get us far enough away so we can have a laugh. But what do you think the grace period's going to be on this?
About 100 years, like it was with the books all about the First World War. There was a big rash of them, all coming out in 2014. There's lots of them. I went to quite a few of the launches. And nice romantic stories, horror stories, all sorts of things. Been several films in this past few years, all set in the First World War. So 100 years is a good thing.
But mind you, I mean, I suppose one thing in sort of against that, I mean, I can't remember many films about the Spanish flu, like set 100 years after. I mean,
no.
And that again, I know that perhaps it's not very sexy because the way it killed people wasn't, you know, with bullets and bombs and rats and gas and shit.
So many more people as well, and it's one of the few things you've ever seen with the programmes about population and how the population of the world is increasing, how we're probably going to get to 9 billion, maybe 10, and there was like showed how the blip happened just after the First World War, which they didn't attribute to the casualties, but to Spanish flu, and then the population went down and then crept back up again. And it's just, I think, because the numbers were so vast that it becomes beyond something that you could easily think about. It's just like, you'd rather not. I think that's probably a lot of people sort of like would rather like believe in the times that we're living now, that it's not really happening, and they can easily convince themselves because they've got enough people with stories to convince them that things are normal. And yeah.
Well, I mean, that's the thing. I mean, you can find the truth in anything. To be brutally honest, you could, fuck's sake, I mean, people go and look at tea leaves and go and say, oh, look what's happening here. Hilda next door, so I go and break a hip tomorrow. I mean, fuck me. It's not. It's just, to my eyes, I just think that's just tea leaves. And I'm not trying to diminish anyone, because I mean, ultimately, people in this world and in this life need hooks that you can go and keep some kind of sanity in this crazy batshit world. But again, I suppose also, I mean, so kind of saying about the sort of 100-year thing, it kind of sort of takes into what kind of things could be popular, because retro things, people always, sort of think, oh, perhaps the 80s is long enough away now, perhaps we can go and start going and reinvent some 80s horror slasher-style killer come around, but we're going to do it with a modern take, like a digital mask and that sort of shit. And so that sort of stuff always tends to be popular for a small period of time. But
I'm not sure it's going to be 100 years. I think our society now is so intent on content, which is a word I fucking hate, but I don't even think this is working. I'll just speak loudly, how about that?
That's yours, yeah. We got 4 points.
So, like, if you take something like the Twin Towers, you can now see lots of films set around the Twin Towers and around the Afghan War and around the Iraq War, and that's like 20 years ago. So I think there will be a grace period, and we will come back to the pandemic and set things during the pandemic, but I don't think it'll be 100 years, I think it'll be about 20.
Okay.
Does it depend upon, whether there's something even worse in a shorter period? So part of the reason for, say, the 100 years gap between the First World War and fiction about it is because we had something much worse, 20 years later. So there was much more fiction about the Second World War.
Let's hope you haven't been reading some tea leaves this morning.
Well, genuinely, because if you're drawing parallels, you had the Spanish flu. You could say the Munich Putsch, you can compare that to the insurrection that fell in the US. You got the rise of China, where, poor old Winnie the Pooh, may he rest in peace. And talking about anti-vaccine, that was actually predicted by Netflix in their documentary Pandemic, because it showed the anti-vaxxers in the States. I think part of the reason why they got credence is because even though this is horrendous and it's killed millions, a lot of people who get it are completely fine. You tie that into some of the, if you've read any or followed any Christian evangelical stuff in the States about the mark of the beast and so on. So, it's fertile ground.
But also, there's a I can't remember, it's like a paper done in the 70s, some think tank. And just resurfaced, I think, in the last couple of months ago, about that they predicted that there'd be societal collapse by 2040, just due to the way governments are run and the whole, infrastructure holding the world and the planet and food and this sort of stuff together is so damn fragile. It's always sort of like that thing. The thing that's stuck about the pandemic to me, for years, we as individuals have been told to go and make sure you always save your money, because you always need to make sure if you lose your job, you need to make sure that you can go and support yourself. But then you've got all these big companies that don't follow the same advice. And they're basically imploring you to go out in the midst of a pandemic, keep spending, keep buying, keep, you know what I mean? And it's just...
They live.
Yeah, exactly. There were rules, different rules. I think it's probably going completely off what's going to be the next thing.
The speaking we've probably established is probably in the future, but quite a way off, is going to be about the times we're in now.
Yeah.
I can say, as an editor, I have received lots and lots of stories set in these times, and some of them are extrapolating horrible numbers, and I'm like, I'm not publishing that. So, but something frivolous Hey.
No, I was just going to ask, but based on your comment about the thing about people not taking the vaccines and not taking the mask, do you think there's an element where this is revealed that actually people have noticed that protagonists and even antagonists in fiction, the way they're written, that denial isn't a big enough part of their psychological makeup, given that denial is for most people like the first thing they encounter when coming up with change? I'm just thinking that the only real sort of memes that have come up around the whole kind of vaccine denial thing have been, Jaws, a 60-year-old novel, and obviously the Harry Potter thing with the Ministry of Magic just refusing to sort of believe the evidence. But those are the only two examples I can really think of sort of in mainstream fiction of people really leveraging denial as a kind of psychological driver.
Yeah, I suppose, like you say, people have failed to realise the actual power of that, and not necessarily it's got power per se, but the ability to persuade and disseminate information which, has a source of some description. I'm not saying where that source is legitimate with some fucking person on Facebook who's just having a dull moment and does a quick post up, but again, it does show the power of social media and also people's susceptibility to, again, as I said, people can believe whatever the hell they want, and they can find meaning in anything. And what I think is, one, that other person's not. They're going to look at me and think, well, why the hell are you thinking that? That's crazy. What are you basing? Because science, at the end of the day, is constantly evolving. It's not fact. It's just, I've dropped this brick from here and it's done that. So that's what you measure. You measure the effects on it. But who's to say in 3 years down the road you drop that same brick and there's something slightly different, you notice something, different molecules come out, because then we're at a stage where we're able to go and determine and pick them up. Well, I'm going off it again, aren't I?
I was interested. We're playing just a minute. But that was a deviation from kind of like the world of physics, I imagine.
Wrong panel, wasn't it? That's next door. Sorry.
So something light then. Now, have we got anything light that we are envisaging is going to be a breakout thing? Like what's coming up? You think in the world of fiction?
I mean, for me, I write silly things, and I'm not going to stop writing silly things because I'm a silly person. Obviously, it's modelled down with seriousness and where the world. I'm not going to go off it again, no guys. But again, it's just for me, my writing and not just me, but also a vast number of people is about entertaining people. We're not here to go and sort of. I do if I can write like Dave, like the sort of thriller sort of style elements. I'll give it a crack. But ultimately, there's going to be a knob joke in it, and there's going to be biscuits, and it's going to. There's always biscuits. There's always time. But again, that's just me, because I just like finding something almost banal and then making it larger than life, over the top, silly. And like I say, I know some say I write in the bizarre-ish subgenre, which comes out of sort of Portland and the west coast of America. And you notice in there at the moment that's just. That's just pure imagination in the bowl, just like that. And the number of stuff that's coming out of there is just growing and growing and growing. And you're always getting subgenres of a subgenre, I don't even subgenre. And it's just, but again, because people within are finding you got the super weird things, but also you've got a bit like me. People always say, "Oh, you're a horror author." I'm not. I write things which are more gory and stuff like that. So, but again, so for example, would you try and make things a bit more hilarious, or try and lighten the tone in your books, or?
No.
You're going to make it bleaker. You get back next to it, isn't it?
I don't. I go for the interplay between the characters is where you get your humour, I think, rather than a one-liner or a weird kind of your taxi driver, basically. Yeah. For those of you that don't know, if you read Cannibal Nuns from Outer Space by Duncan, there's a brilliant speech by a taxi driver in it that I'm not going to spoil here, but it's fantastic. So for me, it's about, sitting in the bar last night, you're having serious conversations about writing, but somebody always throws a joke in. You don't have really in-depth, deep conversations without somebody throwing a knob gag in, usually you.
Yeah.
And that's not to say that you can't have a serious conversation. It's just that normal conversations between people tend to have an element of humour to them. That's why you like people. That's why you hang out with them. It's kind of the Marvel thing, you know. Marvel realised probably around the time they made Guardians of the Galaxy that if they made it funny, the action scenes hit harder, and so we end up with Infinity War and Endgame. Infinity War is fucking hilarious. You know, I don't care if you're a Marvel fan or not, it doesn't matter. As a piece of filmmaking, they've got everything right in there. The pacing is perfect, the characters are perfect, the dialogue, when to dial that back and focus on a serious moment, it's quality. And the writers of that don't get enough praise, really. So this is a very long way of saying that I think, you know, you can sneak humour into just about anything.
Yeah, and they are great. It ties very well in with this panel because Marvel, of course, one of the things that we hang on is like some of the fan YouTube watch list when they sort of like look at the MCU planned universe. So like what's coming out in the next 5 years, and then sometimes that changes.
Yeah.
That they change the dates that things are going to come out, or they bring other films in and push things back. So that
I think as well,
they're following the trends exactly, aren't they?
I mean, I think with, say, example, if you look at Ragnarok, I think that kind of came out of the blue, and people weren't expecting anything from it, and it actually made people laugh way more than they thought it would. So they kind of thought, oh, hang on, there is actually, you know, people are actually willing to go and watch these kind of funny films about superheroes, you know, basically running around beating the shit out of things.
I even noticed in the trailer for that, Thor Ragnarok, that you see the Thor suspended from a chain, and he goes, "I know what you're thinking." That is how most comics open their sets, and then they say I'm not clearly the daughter of somebody and somebody, and then cross two people over.
and the fact that Jeff Goldblum's in it, do you know what I mean? You can, even The Fly, I mean, that film used to turn my stomach when I was 7 and watch that, but there's still moments in which are absolutely hilarious. Probably shouldn't be, but probably more taste to me. But okay, so go back to Dave. I mean, so even when I started writing, I was unintentionally putting humour in it. It's the same. You know, whenever we face adversity, especially during the last 18 months, for example, our first instinct, I don't know if it's just because we're British, or I'm pretty sure it's not, but it's all I've got to reference it by, is the black humour. It's trying to find some levity in something which is really fucking depressing, and like I say, it just makes people smile, just trying to change how people feel. So, I mean, how about you guys? I mean, do you think, are you happy to go for things to stay as they are? Is your reading habits change? Are you going to look for different things, or?
I'm carrying on as I was before. I love fantasy and comics and stuff. I'm going to carry on doing that. And you know, some just random stuff. So I just picked up this book in the dealer's room, and you know, choose Spencer, fighting fantasy style. You know, like humour. That's brilliant. But I wonder whether some authors or some creators who are working on stuff in this vein may bring in some Corona stuff. So, for example, Charlie Stross was gearing up towards the end of the world in his Laundry File series anyway. So I wonder whether he'll incorporate some of that. Because I know he made some sly references to Brexit. So, you know, part of the reason for us leaving the EU is because, spoiler, but the ruler of the UK wanted it to happen for reasons of satanic sacrifices, among other things.
I believe that. That's actually.
Sounds legit.
Seems reasonable.
Yeah, they're conservative.
But I think if you go beyond books, I think there's going to be more risk averse and more due diligence on both TV and movies, because Marvel is going to lose hundreds of millions of dollars because they didn't pick up that Chloe Zhao made some comments that were anti the Chinese Communist Party, and so did Simi Lau. Nothing major, and you know, but because they were picked up, those two films aren't going to get released in there, and that's going to cost Marvel hundreds of millions of dollars. So they may actually have, while you increase diversity in terms of representation, you may actually have people who are more restricted, or the other thing in a non-fantasy sense. You know, John Cena's grovelling apology when he mistakenly referred to Taiwan as a country.
So yeah.
Well, you asked the question. You said a couple of things, but one of the things you said, black humour, just because you're British now, there'll be more black humour everywhere.
Yeah, I was going to make a point of reference because, say for example, are you American?
Yeah, I am. I mean, the reason I mention it is because I worked, so I guess now like 20 years, I worked jobs that just were around a lot of tragedy, bad stuff.
Yeah.
And the people who work those jobs, they're just awful black humor. I mean, I won't even repeat them.
Yeah. But that's what I mean. So, example, I remember the Manchester bombs a few years back, and I sort of knew some people that were sort of, not directly affected, but they were still up there and they were still shaking and stuff. But even there, a couple of days later, they're still trying to find, and their understanding of it was by making jokes of it and stuff like that. I mean, even sort of, the larger disasters that we've had over the last 20 years, the Twin Towers, for example. I mean, again, I've got no idea, but I can guess that there's obviously, underlying some people trying to make, not a joke per se, but just trying to find some levity in it, and it's just...
It's how you survive, isn't it?
Yeah.
You survive these grim times. Okay, so during these grim times, also, we've been watching an awful lot of segue. We've been watching a lot of streaming services. And do you think that the sort of like prevalence of streaming services and instant entertainment gratification is going to shape the way that we respond in the fictional world?
I mean, I kind of get back to what you're sort of saying about the Marvel films. I mean, the thing, you look at Black Widow, and that's released, like a lot of films went straight to Disney Plus service and this, that and the other, and that's obviously impacted their margins. Well, it's impacted Scarlett Johansson's margins as well. But it's just, it's a double-edged sword, isn't it? I mean, if you genuinely, I remember when I was a kid, we had 3 channels on the telly. To go and change it, I had to get up. Actually, I told my brother to get up because I was elder. So he had to go and press the go and change the button. On the dodgy day, the aerial needed a bit of a tweaking. I remember we got a video recorder in '86 and the World Cup was on. Completely by chance, I wasn't going around looking at people's faces because I wasn't that person then. I got chicken pox.
Were you saying that person then he qualified?
Chicken pox party. So I remember sort of sat on the sofa, God, rough as hell. And my dad had recorded the matches on video recorder. But of course, the remote control, you had to plug it into the front of the machine. And I just sort of think back then, I was thinking, God, all I want to play on a computer where it's lifelike, and you can walk around the city and you can do things and you can get into that house, you get into this car. And then Grand Theft Auto 3 came out in like 2001. I was like, fuck,
it's the language that you've adapted from the game.
Yeah, and I was like, how can life get any better? And then you get mobile phones, and then you've got internet, and I'm like, why the hell do I want internet and a mobile phone? And of course, 5 years later, you got internet and mobile phone because it's so much damn easier. We got so much, it's the C word again, so much content, the other C word. But we've got so much at our fingertips nowadays that it's impossible to have believed when we were children. I mean, I'm probably older than some of you, which is a good thing. And I think just nowadays, I view it as a good thing, but also it does make us lazy in a way, because I remember, again, when I was young, if you watch a TV series, if you miss 5 minutes of it, you've missed 5 minutes of it. There's no fucking way of getting that back unless you recorded it. I remember running downstairs, still doing my trousers and my jeans up, trying desperately to make sure that I didn't miss a bit of bottom TV series. Because, God, I should have shown you something different. But again, that's kind of, it made you work for it. And nowadays, if you miss it, you say, oh, I don't know, it's been recorded, I can go and watch it on +1, or it will be repeated ad infinitum for the next God knows how long. And it has kind of made us lazy. And even now, I'll go, okay, I want to watch a bit of bottom TV series. It's on Netflix, or it's been on this, that, that. There's so much out there. It just kind of takes away almost finding things, And word of mouth it's changed that, and it's good and bad. I mean, like the Queen's Gambit. I mean, someone said to me, "Oh, should we watch that?" I said, "What's it about?" I was about chess. I was like, "Fucking hell!" And then I watched it, and it's engrossing as hell.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? More than a lot of the things that that normally float my boat.
And weirdly so, because the resolution of the story is like not how we have been led to expect story resolutions to go.
Yeah,
and
that's what I mean. And that's why finding the cream above the stuff. Yeah, anyway, you know what I mean. When it rises to the top, that saying, which I've completely forgotten.
Promotion.
Yeah, and that's what I mean. And when you find a little gem like that, it's brilliant. But there is so much shit out there. That's a problem.
Mm.
Yeah, the shit that's out there is a problem. It's a massive problem. Like wading through to try and find those gems is actually quite hard. Particularly if you've got more than one streaming service. You know, me and my wife like to watch a film on a Friday night, and you come home and it's like, well, it's 6 o'clock, we want to watch a film at 8, we best start looking now to find one, you know. Obviously that's an exaggeration, for anyone says, you fucking moron.
What you need to do, you just need to be just be too busy to watch anything,
Well,
and then have a husband who starts a series and then can give you a heads up on whether or not it's worth watching, because if he wants to carry on with it, then I'll join in from episode 3, it's fine.
The other thing about all of these streaming services, though, is there's a broader point of affordability. You know, at the moment we have Netflix and Disney Plus. Not giving any money to Bezos because he's Bezos.
Oh yeah, is that still going on with? I hear about Alan Dean Foster. Is it?
Alan Dean Foster.
Yes, with the black hole. Memories really dodge at the moment, but yeah, I bought that book from my nephew. It's a fantastic book.
He treated his workers during the pandemic absolutely appallingly at a time when everybody really needed it, which I think sums up the quality of a man and a company. But anyway, we digress. You know, so Disney Plus is costing me something like 60 quid a year. Netflix is costing me 14 quid a month because I've got the 4K one.
Yeah, same here.
You know, so if you're at a point where, you know, fuel prices are going up, food prices are going up, everything is increasing in price, inflation has hit 4%. This is turning really depressing, isn't it?
You're going to make choices.
At some
maybe.
point, somebody's going to have to go, well, I can eat or I can watch Netflix, and that's kind of wrong. You know, again, 3 channels, and you know, you watched what was on.
Yeah.
But going sort of wider than that, I think if you try to chase that, and it's like, well, I'm going to write something that Netflix will not be able to turn down. It's going to be awesome. It's going to have a chess-playing prodigy who turns into a kick-ass superhero at night. I could write that.
That is basically Gambit. I mean, Gambit's kind of, yeah. I play words, I love it.
You know, if you start doing that sort of thing, you're going to fail. You know, it's the chasing of a trend is not really going to get you anywhere. You know, unless you're absolutely 100% interested in a big quick buck rather than a career.
And if you're a quick writer, because obviously trends can move pretty fast nowadays, so you need to get that pretty sharpish.
Yeah.
So you're one about drafts, whatever, you need to put your finger on.
Well, yeah. There's I think there's one thing that's going pretty hell of the leather at the moment, and that is psychological thrillers with female protagonists.
Yeah.
So there's been a lot of them. I would say some of them have been written quite quickly, and they're not as exciting as others. But yeah, there was a lot of them being sort of like really pushed forward, and I think with the idea of getting them out onto streaming services as dramas eventually. If everyone's got that eye on the main chance, haven't they? Yeah. So do you think yourselves, are you writing with the eye in the future that maybe somebody will take your brain children and do that, or offer you that?
Well, it's the dream, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know, because at the end of the day, if somebody picks up and options your book, well, for a start, that doesn't mean it's going to get made. For a start, you know, that's a very long process. Foundation has just been turned into a TV series. They've been trying for like 20, 30 years to make Foundation as a TV series. The book came out in 1950 something. You know, it's an incredible book, you know, and it still holds up. But you know, I think again, if you're chasing that, if that's the only reason you're doing it, prepare to be disappointed. That said, my werewolf thrillers, they'd make a fucking great film. You know, anybody? No?
Oh, that's another thing that's picking up, I've noticed at the moment, horror. Because for a while they were the only things getting cinematic release, and people have just started switching onto them, haven't they?
Yeah, well, there's a reason for that. Is horror films traditionally are quite cheap to make. You know, generally they're small locations, small cast, high death count. You know, that's how you make a horror film. And, you know, you can make one with your phone in this room within the next hour.
I think we feel that's been going on, to be fair.
Seal the doors.
We're going to fight our way out. Operation Get Behind Duncan. You know,
I bought fucking swords, so I'll get first dibs.
I'm not saying that it would be a good film, you know, but you could make it. And essentially, if you got the buckets of blood and started throwing them all over the screen, you know, people go nuts for that sort of thing. And
It's blackberry jam.
it would,
Don't ruin the magic, man.
and you know, again, it's kind of like horror films are very, very profitable because they're cheap to make, and it doesn't necessarily mean that they're a good film. And actually, the law of diminishing returns kicks in really quickly. Say, take Saw as an example. The first Saw film's really good, really, really good. It's tight. It's not massively gratuitously violent. I mean, it is, but it isn't massively so. But as soon as they go into the sequels, it's like, well, what do we do now? Oh, I know, we're going to have somebody in a cage with needles all over him, and you know, he's going to be absolutely eviscerated in seconds. And I can't be asked about that.
Yes. Do you want to play a game? Yes. Scrabble sounds lovely.
Yeah, I mean, I say I've got a finger on the pulse if going to shove a finger at my ass. You know what I mean? It's not really something that I do for me. For example, that book which you got today. I mean, I started writing that 5 years ago, and I'm not the slowest writer in the world, but I tend to try and work on one project, get it done, and it usually sees light in sort of 12 to 18 months. But because of the nature of putting that book together, it has been a bastard. But again, I wanted to go and it kind of bridges two styles. So back then, you know, I had one set view of it, and now it's turned into something completely different. And like I say, I'd love nothing more than someone to go and try and replicate one of my books. And you know, people would say, "Oh, that'd be really good as a book." We would, but fuck me, especially like Campbell Downs, for example.
Your book would be good as a book.
Good as a book.
Yeah, it really is a book. Just keep it as a book.
Just internet.
What would
Yeah.
you more pictures?
That's where I'm going wrong. But also, no, just quickly touch on the horror thing. So, obviously, I say horror's maybe resurgence. I think that's wrong. I think horror's more accepted nowadays in the mainstream. We've got a lot more friends of mine that have been watching horror on the sly, not just behind the fingers behind the sofa.
That's not like that with the cushion.
Exactly, you know what I mean? They're full sat on the cushions now, but they're not afraid to admit it anymore. It almost feels like a little dirty sort of, I'll watch horror films. And it's socially accepted now. I mean, people come out and say, I quite like watching people getting their faces ripped off. But also, quickly on sort of TV series, one thing I've noticed is you don't tend to get a lot of horror TV series. The only ones you tend to get are the horror comedy ones. You can tend to get like The Evil Dead, Ash vs. The Evil Dead, which has got middling returns in my opinion. I love the character, I love the world, but I think it wasn't the greatest.
In which case, you need to definitely get hold of Rob Kemp's The Elvis Dead. That is a one-man musical parody with featuring Elvis songs of The Evil Dead 2.
Okay.
Actually, Evil Dead. So yeah.
But I say, apart from that Ash vs. The Evil Dead, you've got Stranger Things.
Live was great.
That is good.
Yeah.
But Hotop as well. But as I say, apart from that sort of Stranger Things, horror as a TV series, it doesn't tend to translate very well, so it tends to be sort of filmed. But again, what I'm seeing a lot more of is a lot more sort of Facebook horror chums that have a lot more of their books optioned, which is a bloody good thing, because that's the problem I'm finding is I don't want to watch fucking Jason 23. He comes back from the dead again. Do you know what I mean? I mean, the bastards, how many times he's got seven times? Yeah, well, this time he's got a tail. Look at his tail. I don't give a crap, you know what I mean?
This time he's wearing a Spock.
Yeah. He's got a body apron on, and he's northern. Oh, aye. That's actually, I want to fucking write it. But I think as well, just because this is the thing a lot of us have been saying for ages, mainly because we write indie horror. There's so many original ideas out there, but again, the risk-averse thing. A lot of big companies are afraid to go and put money into the unknown. And I think we're starting to see that hopefully now, at least optioning and give these things a try. Because, you know what I mean? Like, look at Blair Witch. I'm not saying Blair Witch is the best film in town or whatever, but look at the marketing campaign for that. People who didn't give a shit about horror knew about the Blair Witch. They knew the images and the still frames from it, and even that's some kind of cultural thing, you know. And even Jason and Freddie, you know, they're bloody stupid, but
That was a brilliant film. I love that. Freddie v. Jason.
We're going to talk after this.
yeah, you found the right guy. But yeah, do you know what I mean? And there's so many iconic things. It's just, but we need a new generation of that. We need new characters, and not even new characters, because a lot of things is the settings, and is, you know, yeah. I'm going to be quiet.
No, I totally agree.
Salmon.
Salmon.
That's just, yes, it's an idea.
Okay, well, yeah. The next 5 years of salmon.
It's going to be a series based on salmon living in an estuary and really murderous.
Killer salmon.
Obviously.
Yeah. This time they bite back.
The Maori herb salmon.
Again, there's a breakout hit with the Bob Mortimer and Paul Whitehouse series about fishing.
Yeah.
Because, again, sometimes people need these things for solace, don't they? The lovely gentleness of programming. So we have laughter, frivolity, we have horror, we have griplet, and these are my suggestions. You need some more suggestions, guys. What else is going to be the next big thing? Is it here? That's another question. Is the next big thing?
Well, the next
here?
big thing, in my opinion, is Dave.
I think the next big thing is Duncan.
And we both think it's Donna.
And everyone else is Duncan.
So basically, you know about cryptocurrency? We're doing it on White currency. So I literally
Invest.
I've changed my portfolio to being Don and Dave heavy.
My signature's now worth 100 pounds.
Why do you think I got you to sign those menus yesterday?
White pounds groats. No?
So, more recently, the thing I've noticed that's been making a real big impression to the Western market is foreign horror and foreign movies, and people seem to be looking at those more. And it's sort of you can sort of predict the trends of where things are going. Like I'm expecting we'll be talking about coronavirus stuff. I'm thinking people will go near that, but not quite. They're going to look at mutations from medicines, from injections, from something like that, and they'll go down that route of people becoming weird or behaving weird because of something they've been exposed to, not zombie style, but that sort of thing. And that way they touch on the pandemic without going.
The atomic age and kind of giant bugs, I think this is going to be the 21st century equivalent.
Yeah. To be honest, we need bigger bugs, because they all kick ass.
One thing, Elon Musk has talked about life becoming multiplanetary. If, and I don't think that's impossible, if that does happen and there's a colony on Mars or something, a self-sustaining one, how do you think that will affect fiction?
Oh, great. That's us going to ruin some other planet as well. No, let's not.
But again, you got to say, it would be cool, because I mean, we write according to the situation you're in and the experiences you've had. And for example, if you've gone there, you would have a different, because you, like I say, the explorer attitude and the sort of, reaching out and striking out for new worlds and the whole experience. But then you've got to say the flip side, you've got someone who's been born there. So they've never known multi-story car parks or Dave down the Aldi or whatever, you know what I mean? So their view and their aspirations and their drive could be something completely different. And obviously, at its core, it's still going to be based on humans, because for the most part, we're a pretty shitty bunch, with some shining lights in all of us. God, I'm doing it again. I'm trying to be all down this Sunday. But yeah, that's it. It would very much sort of, because again, you've got different things you fight against. I say, everyone here's got, everyone has got the same core drives. You need to sleep, you need to breathe, you need to eat, you need to drink. And obviously, you've got the luxuries like sex and stuff, and books and t-shirts. God, I'm listening again. But again, in a different world, when a lot of those things are stripped back to the basics of the things you need for survival, then you'd like to think that it wouldn't be so focused on aspirational things. It's more survival and it's more feral, I suppose.
Yeah, we have 3 minutes of this panel remaining.
No, go ask a question.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
Maybe 3 minutes from that.
Chris Jarvis, CBBC.
Do you think this is a nice question to ask, but so in terms of like breakout hits, particularly in terms of like books, do you think the next big thing will be based on like a new idea, a relatable idea, or a well-written book?
Cheers.
Good, great question.
Can we do a pause for 3 minutes?
Yeah. I think it's like anything subjective. So what I would consider well written, I could see it's well written, but it not necessarily appeal to me. And this isn't completely late, but so for example, Adam Neville, I know he's had none of his books optional. It's coming out quite soon. But the one that's been interesting that he wrote recently, I can't remember if it's Reddening, but it's basically done with that, not to be set on any characters, and that's a completely different approach. But again, whether anyone's brave enough to try and pick it up and run with it and turn it into something which, because again, people haven't seen things like that before, and I think we need a few big people out in the entertainment industry to say, you know what, we're going to take some chance on these things, throw a few against the wall. Some will hit, some will splat, some will disappear without fucking trace. But that's what you need to do. We need to evolve, and I don't think we're doing that at the moment.
I would hope that it's some kind of combination of all three, to be honest. That we definitely need new ideas, 100%. I don't want to be going to see Shang-Chi 10, the legend of he's now got 50 rings or whatever.
Is he thinking it's Sonic?
Yeah.
He's got to catch them all.
I'm not like I would have made for a better film.
Oh, she's lost them all. Back to number one.
Use this neat trick. It's like hula hoops.
Hula hoop in his way. Anyway, you know, so I think those new ideas keep things fresh, and you know, your problem with the success of Marvel is it's just another superhero film. However, and I know I said earlier that they do them really well, and I love them. You know, they are my childhood encapsulated on screen. It's fantastic. But I want to see something else. You know, I was like, has anyone seen Tenet by Christopher Nolan?
Yes. Yes.
See, I loved it.
Yeah,
I thought it was brilliant. And it got criticised for two things. One was the sound mix, which is a fair criticism. And the other one was that it was hard to follow. And
It's not that hard to follow.
I really didn't think it was hard to follow.
It's basically the same story in a loop, is it?
Yeah, exactly. And we've started in the middle.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, that's a spoiler.
Well, I really love the I think the cinematographer, when he accepted his award for it in the BAFTAs, he did it in a video in reverse.
Oh, nice.
So like with the award flying into his hands as he fell over.
The behind the scenes stuff, and that's fantastic, by the way. If you want to see A-list actors running backwards, it's brilliant.
Also, very quickly, I think as well, I think people starting out writing and seeing films being made about books which are different and which push boundaries and are well written encourages people starting out and people like us still going through it, that there is a chance, and that, you know, the golden apple at the end of the road of goldenness is actually attainable, and it's not just for the few or just for the same tried and trusted ideas. That would be nice.
Yeah. Okay, so that is the end of our panel. Oh no, you had a thing to say, yes?
Sure. I mean, I'll tee it pretty quick, I guess. I mean, you've talked a lot about how, like, we're living in pretty sharp times. It strikes me that maybe what people want or need is sort of that light in the darkness, and I wonder if stories of hope are maybe the next big thing, and I wonder what you think of that.
We can only hope so, I think.
Definitely is. It'd be nice to go and see something like that for once, wasn't it? Uplifting stuff.
Right, thank you for joining us. Buy stuff in the dealer's room.
Yeah.
Thank you. We have been
Thanks all.
Dave.